Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome into Hoopsville on this Thursday evening. A little bit of a delay there. Apologize for that. Hope you are enjoying your basketball season and the middle of December. If you got questions for us, there's always one way to get a hold of us. Tweet us at D3Hoopsville or hashtag Hoopsville. Email us, hoopsville at d3hoops.com. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/Hoopsville. There's numerous ways to do it, and you should be able to figure it out if you're a fan. If not, we will have something scrolling at the bottom of your screen momentarily to remind you. It is that time of year where it's an interesting time of year, to be blunt. There are teams who haven't played in about, let's see, today's the 13th, probably anywhere from a week to 10 days, and they won't play for another several weeks. They will go a month between games. Now, there's a variety of reasons for that. Some due to restrictions of the school, for example. You got finals, and then they don't want to have them participating necessarily during a break, in whatever case. Some schools aren't traveling this year, can't afford to travel, whatever the case may be. So they won't go anywhere for games. And, of course, the other big reason is that in the East Coast, especially anybody who wants to participate in ECACs, and this is where I think this is getting a little, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is the last I checked, maybe this is getting a little convoluted. They need to take a certain amount of time off. I think it's like something like 10 consecutive days, or they're not eligible for that tournament besides being over 500 to begin with. I think the ECAC controlling that at this point in time with their lack of influence is maybe a little over the top. But I digress. Maybe that rule's changed since the last time I checked in on it. But you get, as a result, a lot of teams who are idle right now. On the women's side, there are 11 teams in the top 25 idle this week. Starts with Bowdoin, who's at 8-0, who's idle. Then you can jump down to Amherst, who's 6-1. Of course, similar that they're in the same conference. That's the NESCAC, who takes some time here. Trine is 8-1 and is idle. SUNY Geneseo and Gettysburg are both idle. DePaul, Oshkosh, Texas, Dallas, Randolph-Macon, Wartburg, and Emory and Henry, all idle. Those receiving votes: Trinity, Connecticut, another NESCAC team. Millsaps, Middlebury, another NESCAC team. Rochester Tech, DeSales, Misericordia, all idle. As a result, there's been no losses on the women's side. There's actually been just barely any games this week. Tufts defeated Emerson, no surprise, rather easily. Scranton defeated York surprisingly easily. I thought York would give up a little bit more of a fight there, 89-46. George Fox played Warner Pacific and won easily. Messiah defeated Lycoming by 11 to get to their 10th win. East Texas Baptist defeated Howard Payne. That's it. That's all that is played in the top 25 on the women's side. On the men's side, it's about the same. Again, you've got teams that are in the NESCAC who are idle, but Williams, Hamilton, and Whitman are idle. You also have Plattsburgh State, Worcester, Randolph-Macon, Wabash, and Salisbury, along with Middlebury idle. That's 9 teams on the men's side in the top 25, plus Scranton, Johns Hopkins, both idle as well in the receiving votes category. Again, some schools that are in the NESCAC mentioned there, and schools who are similar. So you get this really weird period of time now, which I guess, I haven't been able to fully appreciate, as I'm usually busy with Stag Bowl this time of year, and hats off to the gents who are already in Shenandoah, Texas for the Stag Bowl this year. But this is a time of year where you still get some games, and it's one of the reasons we are scheduled to be on the air through the 20th, through a week from tonight, because you still have games being played. Now, because of what I was reading today and the lack of games, we are going to double-check next week, make sure there's some games, and we'll double-check in the next 24 hours, make sure that we should still stay on the air for a show on the 20th. But we want to give you as much in-depth coverage as we can. We usually do a show then because it works with Stag Bowl. By the way, on the men's side, Rochester lost to Ithaca, which was a surprise to begin with. I think Ithaca was 4-3 entering that game. And Rochester lost to them by 15, 85-70. Not pretty. Rochester had risen to 13. You could make an argument maybe that was a little too high. I don't know where I've got them. I don't have my top 25 once again. Well, maybe it is right here. Hold on. Bear with me. Under it. Yep, there it is. I've got Rochester sitting at, where are they? There. I have them 13. Maybe it's high, but when you're undefeated, some of the times that starts to rise to the top. Not all the time, but sometimes. The other team that lost, Platteville, lost to Wheaton, 99-77. Platteville's 5-3. Got to wonder what's going on with Platteville. I thought they were going to be better this year. Maybe I completely misread that. We'll see them in Vegas. I'll get a better answer on that, to be sure. So tonight's show is kind of about, okay, you're still playing. Maybe there's some travel involved. You're dealing with exams. You're dealing with holiday distractions in general. You're dealing with travel distractions, whether they're with the team or it's personal, going home for the holidays. Everybody's dealing with some kind of distraction this time of year. It's a weird time of year. Not only for finals reasons and not only for basketball reasons, but obviously personal reasons. And so, and it's not only basketball is what I meant to say. It's also ice hockey. It's just a weird time of year in sports. And you don't get this necessarily in the fall. You don't necessarily get this with spring sports. Yes, they all have to deal with finals to some degree. And in the spring, you certainly have to deal with graduations eventually if you're still playing. But the rest of the time, it doesn't have this weird break. Yes, you could argue maybe spring break, but most teams use that to travel and play. So there's less of a distraction. We literally have a time where teams are spending a month not playing basketball. Maybe some practices to keep them fresh, but how fresh are you going to keep a team and how focused are you going to keep a team if they're not playing for a month and you decide to keep them one more week to practice? It may be hard to keep them kind of on task because they know a break's coming. They know that what you're practicing now may not necessarily help them in a couple of weeks because they're going to be sitting on the couch at home. Now, granted, players get up and practice, don't get me wrong, but it's not like they're going to have formal practices. We'll hear from a few coaches and their thoughts on that, and we'll even hear from a student-athlete's point of view tonight. Coming up on the show tonight, a couple of interesting teams that I wanted to talk to this year for a variety of reasons. We'll start out west with Pomona Pitzer. Charles Ketsiafekis joined us on the show to talk about his squad, their big high of beating Whitman in double overtime. I wouldn't call it a low, but a certainly different outcome against WashU. He's pretty frank about what happened in those games, and it's an interesting take, but he also talks about this time of year. Then we'll fly all the way to the East Coast, talk to Muhlenberg women's basketball coach Ron Roan. Muhlenberg never seems to go away in the Centennial Conference. It's a long time since Muhlenberg was running the system with not a lot of talent. And since then, Ron's had teams that are always at the top of the conference. So what is the secret for him? And granted, other teams have been successful, but they have their downs, and Muhlenberg hasn't has as big a down. So we'll talk to Ron Roan about that and how he manages the distractions at a school, much like those in the NESCAC, where certainly academics, all schools take a priority, but academics are on a different level, at least as you are told when talking to people. So we'll talk to him. Then we'll head to a most intriguing team of the season, Thomas More women's basketball. They are squeezing in as many games as they can before conference season gets going because they don't have a conference per se. They certainly don't have a conference schedule. They are on their way to hope for another tournament this weekend. We will talk to Madison Temple, their star senior guard, about what this is all like. She will join us to talk it all through. And then we will switch back to men, and we'll talk to a team who is certainly highly considered, national runner-up, but with a new head coach. Matt Lewis, the interim head coach of the Oshkosh Titans, will join us to talk about the season so far, their lone loss, what the WIAC might look like this season, and how he keeps his team focused this time of year. So that's all coming up. And again, if you got questions for us, as I just noticed our text is a little off. I think it's been off for a little while. You can always join us on Facebook at facebook.com/Hoopsville. You can also join us on Twitter at D3Hoopsville or #Hoopsville or email us hoopsville@d3hoops.com. There'll be plenty of time throughout the show to ask us questions. We certainly would hope you will try and do that. Jay Cozen says, I tuned into Ithaca versus Rochester game and was not impressed by Rochester even a little bit. Thoughts? Ithaca has a junior guard, Riley Thompson, who's averaged more than 24 points a game and starts to look for his shot a few dribbles past half-court line. I was impressed by him. Ithaca is average but played great against Rochester. Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, Jay. Let's start with being impressed with somebody who takes a couple of dribbles over midcourt and looks for his shot. I appreciate that Riley Thompson is scoring 24 points a game, but I am not the kind who gets impressed with someone who goes a couple dribbles over half court and starts looking for his shot. He seems to forget he's got other teammates. Ithaca is average, and I think that's part of it. Now, I'm not trying to dismiss Riley Thompson as a talent. I haven't been able to spend more time watching him. His points per game production is pretty good, but they may need to have him get the rest of the team involved. And yes, the rest of the team may not be his talent, but sometimes they can get better if they are handed the ball. And maybe that's not something to take lightly. If you are dribbling the ball and running things, you're eventually Ithaca's going to take its hits because they're going to shut you down and nobody else can contribute because you haven't gotten anybody else involved. As far as Rochester, yeah, I can understand that. I think, Ryan Scott and I said on the last show, we weren't blown away by Rochester. To some degree, they're going to rise because they're still undefeated. They're well coached. We know the program well. Luke Flakurtsy has a good program. I watched him against St. John Fisher, and I thought they played well. I also thought the play that tied it to force overtime was well crafted by the players on the court. That was not crafted on the bench, as it were. Wasn't crafted in practices. So I can appreciate what they can do. It doesn't mean they're not going to have an off night. It doesn't mean somebody else isn't going to beat them. By 15 was certainly surprising. I think we have to get used to the fact that a lot of teams aren't going to look incredibly awesome, especially in the top 25. I think people have this misnomer that those teams in the top 25 are somehow in a league above everybody else, and that isn't necessarily true. We have, a lot of parity in this division we've had for several years now. This year we may have a crop of better great teams than we've had in the past at the top. It may be deeper, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 teams that are quote-unquote great this year. But in the past, it's been 1 or 2 or 3. Everybody else has been pretty darn good. I think Rochester's in the pretty darn good category. That doesn't mean they're not going to lose because there's a lot of really good teams that can beat them. And there's a lot of times a team can beat themselves. And I think let's watch a little bit more here by Rochester. I'm not going to tell you they blow me away when I watch them, but they also somehow get it done. Matthew writes, Stevens Point has to travel to Minnesota Saturday and Thousand Oaks. Lots of traveling. Maybe. I'd argue that's not really a lot of travel, to be blunt. The women's team's heading to Vegas, so that's more travel. And I will introduce you to the Thomas More women's basketball team that has been out in the last week to the West Coast and back and played about 6 games. I think they've got more travel. Nothing against traveling into Minnesota, but it's all about perspective. You go down to Texas, and there's teams who are traveling in conference 8 to 10 hours one way. So I'm not going to. Yes, Stevens Point's getting some travel in. Don't get me wrong, I get it, but it's not a lot of travel. Also, Nate Dodge is top 5 defensive player and offensive player for sure. Okay, in your opinion, we'll get back to that. I think there's a lot of good defensive players and offensive players out there this year. Top 5? You're telling me he's a first-teamer? I'm not ready to jump on Nate Dodge being a first-teamer right now. It's not a knock on him. There's a ton of good guards this year. There's a decent amount of forwards, but Nate Dodge is in a thick category. We've talked about that on the show. And Brian writes, Oshkosh going all the way. Well, we hope. They're going to have to get through the conference. We just got done talking about Stevens Point, who's darn good themselves. Whitewater's showing they may be pretty decent. Platteville may turn it around. The WIAC's going to be a dogfight, and Oshkosh is going to have to get out of that conference alone. By the end of the year, he will be. Fine, Matthew. I'll take your word for it. I don't agree. We'll see. Let's let him prove that. But I'm not ready to jump on that statement right now about Nate Dodge. And that's not a knock on Nate Dodge. He's a very good player, but we need to see more than what? How many games does Stevens Point play? 7 games. We are about a third of the way through the season, about a quarter, somewhat of the way through the season. Yeah, between a quarter and a third of the way through the season. There's a lot to play here. Let's just, we'll wait on it. All right. Brian says they were so close last year. Yes, Brian, they were close last year, but here's the difference. That was last year. I can't tell you how many times we've seen in Division III a good team who should produce the same doesn't return to the same next year because the tournament will be different. The conference is different. There's so many factors. Not to mention the fact they have a coaching change. And while others will tell you Matt Lewis is good, and I'm not saying he's not, it's still a change. What Pat Yuckham would do during a timeout or during a tense moment in the tournament, Matt Lewis hasn't gone through yet. We don't know how Matt Lewis is going to react to when Oshkosh needs a timeout or needs a break or whatever. We haven't seen that yet, and we haven't seen how the players respond around Matt Lewis yet either. We've only seen, again, a quarter to a third of the season. So, yes, Oshkosh is good. I'm not denying they are not. They are good, but so is Stevens Point. Platteville was probably going to be darn difficult to deal with, and so is Whitewater. That's just in conference. Then you get into the NCAA tournament, should Oshkosh make it, and we all know already by Oshkosh's own history that it's not easy to get to the Final Four, let alone to the championship game again. It's been a long time since we have a team in the championship game on back-to-back years. Oshkosh is 20 points better than Whitewater. Okay, Sean, if you say so. How about we play the rest of the season? There's a long season ahead of us. And there's going to be a lot to talk about on whether that is the case. Phil writes, the YouTube event hasn't begun. Well, that's weird. Oh, I know why. Whoops.